Welcome to Crosspointe.
Welcome to Crosspointe.
Welcome to Crosspointe.
We are an inclusive faith community
seeking to live out the loving, just, and generous way of Jesus.
We are participants in a long tradition
that's less concerned with doctrines and dogma that demand total agreement,
but a life to be lived, enjoyed, and given away to others.
What unites us is a growing awareness that life is precious.
That we are made by love in order to love.
This community is comprised of and affirms the entire human family.
Regardless of race, age, creed,
physical abilities, marital or economic status,
gender identity, or sexual orientation.
So, if you're curious and have come to see,
if you are tired and have come to rest,
if you are grateful and have come to share,
if you are wounded and have come to heal,
if you're joyful and have come to celebrate,
if you are uprooted and have come to belong,
welcome home.
Welcome home.
Welcome home.
Welcome home.
Hey Crosspointe, it is so great to gather with you. I wanted to reach out this morning and let you know of a few things going on in our community and how you could participate. First, for the month of February for Black History Month, we are partnering with the Northwest Cary YMCA and a local bookstore called Liberation Station in Raleigh to collect new and gently used books on the topics of anti-racism, racial justice, and racial equality. These books will then be placed in a lending library at the Northwest Cary YMCA so that members of our greater community can continue to learn about these important topics. We hope to gather books for all ages and all reading levels. For more information, including some reading guides as well as a few local bookstores you could support in the process, go to crosspointe.org/serve. Last month, we broke ground on our second home that we are building with the Wake County Habitat for Humanity Cary Coalition. We are excited because we have 2 service days coming up where we've reserved space specifically for Crosspointe volunteers to work together on this house. You do not need to have any construction experience. You just have to have a willing heart, some clothes you don't mind getting dirty, and the willingness to learn a few things. They will show you the ropes. You do have to be 16 years old to participate on the construction site. For more information, go to our website, crosspointe.org/serve. You can also sign up there. We are gearing up for our return to in-person services on March 13th, and we could not be more excited. One of the things we've realized is a few of our volunteer teams need some support, one of which is our guest services team in areas like parking lots, greeting, hospitality, and even our student ministries team is needing some help as well. They're needing some adults to work in Edge on Sunday mornings, as well as some small group leaders on Sunday nights. If this is an area that you can help us in, please go to our website, crosspointe.org/volunteer, and let us know. Crosspointe, we are who we are because of your partnership in service and in giving. It is because of the way that you do both of these things that we are able to make an impact locally and around the world. If you would like to continue giving financially or begin and do it for the first time, please visit our website, crosspointe.org/contribute, or text crosspointenc to 77977. Thank you so much. Have a great day.
Sometimes I'm under starless sky, but I'm feeling more like dirt. How do I forget so fast who you are and what that's worth? Because there's evidence of you in every corner of this life. So why am I still trying to prove that I don't deserve your time? 'Cause I am yours. It seems like madness, I'm invited to the table by your side. I am yours. 'cause I am yours, and you will always be mine. I'm a man whose one ambition is to dance with my divine. I am yours, and you are mine. We say no, don't let the rain come, 'cause we got our reservations, and the water that we need is bound to overtake us. If I had to write a story of the greatest loves in time, I would have to sing of you. I'm this branch and you're the vine, and the romance that we have, oh, it's easy by design. I was fortunate to find you. I'm still blown away, you're mine, 'cause I am yours, and you will always be mine. It seems like madness, I'm invited to the table by your side. I am yours, and you will always be mine. I'm a man whose one ambition is to dance with my divine, and I am yours, and you are mine.
I've been bathing in Scripture for 40 years now, and the resurrection of the body is different from the immortality of the soul. So whatever in the world that's about, it's embedded in both testaments of the Bible that I've been spending time with. And all it tells me at some level beyond any literal understanding is that matter matters to God. Matter matters to God. It's what the sacraments teach. Bread and wine and water and oil and hands matter to God. And that somehow, if that's not what the affirmation of the resurrection of the body is about, I don't know what else it is, but that God cares about your nostrils. Yeah. Then you can get into all the, medieval scholastic questions of if we are resurrected in the flesh, at what age? If you're resurrected and you've had an amputation, do you get it back? And those are impossible. Those are impossible questions. But I'm shaped Hebrew enough. I got some Greek shaping too, but Hebrew enough to think that you don't get a soul that's not embodied. You might get spirit that's not embodied, but spirit might be that breath that moves through you, in and out, gone, but our souls have got fingerprints all over them. Insofar as I have any illusion that I'm in control of my life, there's quite a few things that happen to me in my body that prove to me I am not. I am, in fact, not in control of my life. So the body, what I mean immediately is, I think pain can get your ego handled pretty fast, but so can pleasure. I think there's also a huge, what did I do to deserve this, that we always say about pain, but it's also true of pleasure. What did I do to deserve to get to live where I live, and look out every night at the sky full of stars? What did I do to deserve that? Nothing. So there's quite a bit that happens in the body that I think when all else fails, when the prophetic word and the incarnate witness and all the rest fails, there's just, I think this sort of, the body makes theologians of us all. Why me? Why like this? Why here? Why this long? Whether it's making love or giving birth or hurting or eating, or it just seems to me again that in the scripture I read, those are the stories we remember and tell, are the ones that speak to our flesh. I don't know how you speak to a spirit exactly. strictly to a spirit. I just can't imagine. It's like talking to a brain in a jar. Hello, brain. So that's what I think about that.
Gave us these bodies and you called them good. You gave us these bodies and you called them good. We are easily damaged. Have you seen the scars? That's just scratching the surface, more beneath where those are. Gave us these bodies and you called them good. You gave us these bodies and you called them good. May we love them as you do. Let us love them as you do. Inside, through and through, let us love them as you do. But we do so much damage. Have you seen the scars? We keep hurting each other. Sometimes that's just how we are. Gave us these bodies and you called them good. You gave us these bodies and you called them good. May we love them as you do. Let us love them as you do. Inside, outside, through and through. Let us love them as you do. These bodies, they are fearfully, wonderfully made. Don't believe the lies some say. Know our flesh and bones, our hearts and hands are loved in every way. Yeah, our flesh and bones, our hearts and hands are loved in every way. You gave us these bodies and you called them good. You gave us these bodies and you called them good. May we love them as you do. Let us love them as you do. Inside, outside, through and through. Let us love them as you do. Let us love them as you do.
Hey friends, really good to be with you. Today what I want to do is I want to look at a story that the gospel writer John records right near the beginning of his letter about the life of Jesus. It starts off this way, John chapter 2, starting with verse 1. On the third day, a wedding took place at Cana in Galilee. Jesus' mother was there, and Jesus and his disciples had also been invited to the wedding. When the wine was gone, Jesus' mother said to him, "They have no more wine." "Dear woman, why do you involve me?" Jesus replied, "My time has not yet come." His mother said to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." Nearby stood 6 stone water jars, the kind used by the Jews for ceremonial washing, each holding from 20 to 30 gallons. Jesus said to the servants, "Fill the jars with water." So they filled them to the brim. Then he told them, "Now draw some out and take it to the master of the banquet." They did so, and the master of the banquet tasted the water that had been turned into wine. He did not realize where it had come from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew. Then he called the bridegroom aside and said, "Everyone brings out the choice wine first, and then the cheaper wine after the guests have had too much to drink. But you have saved the best till now." This, John writes, the first of his miraculous signs Jesus performed at Cana in Galilee. He thus revealed his glory, and his disciples put their faith in him. Now, I want to pause and look at that last sentence for a moment. Because apparently, John attributes a great deal of significance to this particular event, which when you think about it, seems a bit odd that it would be this event, this moment that seems to tip the scales for the disciples in terms of them putting their faith in Jesus. After all, one may think that if this author John wanted to start building a resume for Jesus being God in the flesh, in terms of miracles, one may expect for John to start off writing about one of those miracles that we kind of expect from God. Ones we'd see later on in Jesus' life, where he gave a blind man back his sight, where he makes the crippled able to walk again, when he makes the deaf be able to hear, when he raises people from the dead, because on the surface, those miracles sound much more impactful. But I don't think many of us, if we were organizing the story, the miraculous event that we would choose to record first, and make a point to emphasize as the significant turning point for faith for students would be, well, you know what? Jesus went to a party, they ran out of wine, and Jesus got creative and took care of the problem. I mean, it's just not what we necessarily expect, right? But understand, John, who knew Jesus as well as anyone when he was writing this gospel letter, John had a limited amount of time, he had a limited amount of ink, a limited amount of papyrus with which to write the story of Jesus' life. And to that point, John, in the entire letter, only details 7 of the miracles that Jesus did in his letter that John writes. And yet for John, this one story had to be included. And not only was it included, it was the first one he recorded. And according to John, it was this moment that catalyzed Jesus' followers to put their faith in him. And so, according to John, this has some elevated significance to it, this moment, this event. And so I want to walk through the story for a few moments. I want to ask some questions and then reflect on some of the implications. Now, when we look at the story itself, first of all, it's worth noting that John fails to mention whose wedding this is. We don't know the couple's names or really anything about them. All we know is that Jesus and his disciples were invited and Jesus' mother was there as well. And then there came a problem. Look back at verse 3. When the wine was gone, Jesus' mother said to him, "They have no more wine." Now, it's important to understand that not adequately providing for your guests at an event like a wedding was seen as a social disgrace at the time. In some ways, it would be considered a social disgrace now, but it was especially then. Wine was a staple at this kind of celebration, and to run out would have been a great source of embarrassment. And so, for whatever reason, Jesus' mother feels a responsibility to protect this newlywed couple from such embarrassment. And so she comes to Jesus and says, "They have no more wine." Then Jesus responds, "Dear woman, why do you involve me? My time has not yet come." Now, I want to pause there for a moment because frankly, it can sound rather condescending for Jesus to speak to his mother that way. Even disrespectful. Kind of like this, "Dear woman, why do you involve me?" But it's good to note that in the original language, the word Jesus actually speaks here for woman doesn't carry the negative, disrespectful baggage that it would carry for many of us today if someone was to speak to their mother like, "Hey, woman." In fact, the word Jesus uses here is the same Greek word that servants often use to refer to their queen. Or it's the same word that would be used by someone who would want to express a great tenderness and this affection for someone else. And so that's the tone we should bring to Jesus' voice as we read this. It's not communicated in this distancing, disrespectful type of way, which this brings to light something that's critical to understand when we read Scripture. Each of us brings a certain tone to the text. It's this tone that we hear in our head when we read words and phrases like this that dramatically shape our impression of Jesus and our impression of God. Think about it this way. What if when you read it, again, you hear it in your head as, "Dear woman, why do you involve me?" And it's sarcastic and it's sharp, and maybe it's even loud, where you emphasize certain words and you de-emphasize other words. But it's very different if you hear the words whispered in your head with much more tenderness, like, "Dear woman, why do you involve me?" Again, that's a completely different tone. And it dramatically affects the picture in our head of this interaction between Jesus and his mother. This is the same reason why, though it brings lots of benefits, that texting, email, and social media can present such communication challenges at times. Because each of us create a tone in our head through which we read words. And many of us have a tendency to skew towards skepticism or negativity that greatly affects our interpretation of what we read. And very often it impacts our relationship with the person we're communicating with. And so again, the same thing is true when we read Scripture. And as a result, often our view of Jesus or God is shaped by whatever tone we filter his words through inside our own head, which for many of us often comes from some type of authority figure that we grew up around. And I think that this statement from Jesus, "Dear woman, why do you involve me?" is a great example of how that filter in our head can create all sorts of different types of pictures. Still, though, I don't think that Jesus is annoyed here, because if you look at the context, I think Jesus' main concern was that he didn't want to bring attention to himself. Several times throughout the New Testament, we see Jesus telling people to keep certain things he does quiet for the time being. And furthermore, Jesus was the guest at someone else's wedding. It would very much seem to line up with the heart and the character of Jesus that he didn't want to inappropriately step into the bride and groom's moment and somehow take the spotlight off of them and put the spotlight on himself. It's as if you can imagine Jesus being like, why do you want to involve me in this? Let's just keep the focus on the bride and groom. I'm just going to stay over here. I'm going to do the Cupid shuffle, keep to myself. I don't need the spotlight on me. But I'm pretty confident it wasn't that Jesus didn't care. Instead, I think he was keenly aware of the moment and whose moment it was. Now, another thing worth noting in Jesus' response is revealed in how his mother responds. I mean, we obviously can't read body language here. We can't read tone, but it seems that she doesn't respond with anger. She doesn't seem to be put off or dissatisfied with what Jesus said. So apparently she doesn't take any offense to the way that he said it. Instead, look at what immediately comes next in verse 5. It says, his mother said to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." And I'm always intrigued by that statement. It seems that Mary just trusts that Jesus will do whatever is best in the moment. She doesn't dictate that he does or doesn't do anything. She just simply says to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." And in doing so, essentially what she's doing is that she brings the problem to Jesus and she offers space for him to intervene. And as I spend time reflecting on that, I wonder if there was this hesitation in Mary. You know, this tension in her own mind that she didn't even want to bother Jesus with this. Because if you're anything like me, there's times in my life where it just feels like I shouldn't bother God with the details of my life. I mean, that God has much bigger, more significant things going on in the world than what's just going on with me. And that's one of the reasons this first miracle of Jesus always messes with me. Because through the years, I've gotten to the point that if I begin with a belief in God, then the idea of God creating the universe, initiating the Big Bang, however you want to think about it, that's not a big leap of faith for me. That just seems like something that we would expect God to do, God doing God-sized things. Instead, over the years, what tends to mess with me the most and what challenges my faith the most is reading a story like this and considering that God would care enough to get involved with little things like a wedding party where they simply ran out of wine. A moment that seemingly wouldn't have global ramifications on world peace or dramatically affect future generations, but a moment that in many ways simply saved one couple in this one moment from being embarrassed at their wedding. Look again at what Jesus does in verse 6. Verse 6 says that he instructed the servants to take 6 stone water jars, which totaled about 120 to 180 gallons, and fill them with water. And when the master of the banquet tasted it, it had turned to wine. And John makes sure to point out that this isn't just any kind of wine. This isn't the kind of wine that comes with twist-off caps. This isn't $2 Chuck or gas station wine. Rather, this is the best wine of the party. Now think about that. 180 gallons of wine. That was a lot of wine. Jesus was making sure there was no way they were running out again. And you see, it's these kinds of small, seemingly insignificant details of our lives that I think we can all have a hard time grasping that God actually cares about. And there's probably at least a couple reasons for that. I mean, for many of us, I don't think it comes out of this sense of not wanting God to be involved with our lives, but rather more out of a sense of just not wanting to bother God. It can just seem like our day-to-day issues are simply too insignificant to bother God with, especially in light of all the other things going on in the world. And when we consider all the other major crises that are going on with the coronavirus and bombings and equality and justice issues and impending wars, many of us can have this sense of, like, why in the world would I want to bother God with these little details? But then I think there can also be this sense that some of us carry that if we're going to engage God and actually ask God for something, there's something in us that wants to make sure it's a good one, because we're not sure how many times we can go to that well with God. It's almost as if we think God is this genie in the bottle who's granted us a limited number of wishes, and we don't know how many we get, and so we really want to be sure it's worth it, and that we really need it before we ask God. I mean, we don't want to go to the God card in case we should use it for something more important later on. But you see, here's what's so intriguing about this story, and perhaps it's why John places such significance on it. That there's something about the heart of Jesus that John wants us to understand right from the beginning of his letter. And it's this realization that Jesus is willing to get involved in the details. In the details of a situation that, again, likely didn't matter to anyone else in the world except this small group of people in this one particular moment. It wasn't a problem that was going to address world peace or a cure for cancer or eliminate national suffering. Rather, it was simply a detail that mattered to this one couple, to this one group of people at a party. You see, I think what should stretch our faith is not when God does something that we already assume only God can do. Rather, what should fascinate us about God is that God would do something that would seem like it's beneath God. Something that we would assume really wouldn't matter to God. That would somehow only really matter to you and me. That's what should fascinate us, that God would actually care about the details of our lives. But when you actually stop and think about it, that only makes sense, right? Because whenever any of us really care about someone, details matter. For example, if any of us had to pick up a gift for someone that we didn't know that well, or we didn't care for all that much, we tend to think in terms of generalizations. Like, well, you know what? Everybody likes coffee. Just get them whatever kind. It doesn't really matter. Or, you know, everybody likes chocolate. Just pick up any kind of chocolate at the store. It's fine. Kit Kat, Twix, Snickers, doesn't really matter. But have you ever noticed that the more that you want to express love to someone, the more you start to care about the details? So for example, if I'm going to pick up a tea for my wife, I know I'm going to go get her a large cup. I'm going to fill it up with lots of ice all the way to the top. And then I'm going to fill it up almost all the way to the top with unsweet tea. And then I'm just going to add a tiny bit of sweet tea on the top. Because if I want to show her that I care, that I'm paying attention to what she actually likes, those details matter. Because the reality is, the more you want to express love and care for someone, the more the details matter. It's true of us, and I think it's true of God. And so with all that in mind, here's a few last thoughts I just want to encourage you toward. One, I know for many of us, what makes this idea the hardest to grasp and embrace are specific moments and seasons of significant pain and suffering and disappointment. Maybe you prayed about the specific details of something and what you wanted to happen didn't happen. Maybe you've been enduring tragedy and heartbreak and it feels like God has ignored the details when it's come to your situation. And if that's how you feel, I want you to know there's nothing wrong with feeling that way. I've felt that way lots of times myself. And the thing is, I can't imagine that ever being honest with God about how we feel threatens or offends God. The best thing we can do is just be honest about how we actually feel. And the reality is, for those of us who feel that way, I don't have any simple resolutions for that conflict. Because as I've wrestled through that for years of my life, I've realized that I found myself thanking God and giving God credit for any good thing that happened to me or for anything that happened the way that I wanted it to in my circles of the world or in the world in general. But then when something didn't go the way I wanted, when disappointment flooded in or when suffering or tragedy struck, I would default to, why God? I would go, why would you let this happen? Where are you? And over time, that just didn't seem like a wise or healthy pendulum swing, because ultimately my approach to God and my attitude toward God seemed to be based on whether things were going the way I wanted them to at a particular moment. That would dictate how I felt about God. But I'm not unique in that, though, right? I mean, for generations and generations, people have tried to resolve that tension by landing on one extreme or the other. On one side saying, well, you know what? Well, we're just going to conclude God isn't involved in the day-to-day life happenings at all. God essentially created the world and doesn't interact with the world or with the people in it. God basically created everything and then just drop-kicked it to run on its own. Yet, to embrace that idea is also to ignore the personal experiences that millions of people have had with God. Experiences and interactions that defy logic or any other explanation. And so others go to an opposite extreme and say, well, then God determines everything. Everything that happens for a reason. But to accept that idea is ultimately to embrace that God must be rather twisted and psychopathic to inflict the types of tragedies and injustices we see all over the world. And so between these two extremes lies the tensions of a complex reality, where dancing together in that messy middle is the embracing of faith and the embracing of free will. A trust in God and the acceptance of the weight of personal responsibility. And in that same middle, dancing together is random chance and both tragedies and pleasant surprises happening because they just happen. And people acting out in both the most beautiful and the most broken versions of themselves. And thousands of years of stories and mystical experiences from people sharing about God interacting, communicating, and parenting with love. And so it's in the middle of all those complex tensions and realities that I just kind of choose to stumble around and dance in. And along the way, kind of like the pattern we see with Mary in the story from John, I try to get up the courage to create space for Christ to speak into the details of life, because what I don't want for me, nor for any of us, is for God to be relegated to just a distant, generalized idea that doesn't actually matter. Because when that happens, I think that, one, we miss the heart of Jesus that John describes here in this story, a God who cares about the details and how each of us are affected. But then secondly, the living out of faith can become something that just defaults to distant, generalized ideas as well, where we can find ourselves thinking and believing that love is the best and most beautiful way to live, where we can be all about the idea of love and then still turn off this video today resolved that there's no way we're actually going to express love and kindness to that one person or to that one group or category of people. Because after all, I mean, they're disgusting, they're idiots, they're everything that's wrong with people these days. They don't get any compassion. Or we can find ourselves being all about the idea of forgiveness. We're all about the idea of forgiveness and grace, and we're going to finish watching this still clinging on to bitterness and resentment towards someone, where it shapes our entire view of them and causes us to treat them as less than human, where we only define them as their worst moments and not as someone suffering themselves. And what can happen is our faith can end up being a general agreement with big ideas rather than something we actually live out in the flesh, where the details of each of our lives actually matter to us, to God, and in the lives of others. And so, friends, here's to being a community that lives out the heart of Jesus that we follow, recognizing that details matter. And in that same spirit of Jesus, that our words about trusting and following Christ would take on flesh, and it would change us in the process and change the way we live and the way we treat others. And here's to being a people who live with the awareness that our everyday, ordinary lives aren't beneath God. They're not beneath God's care. That, as Barbara Brown put it earlier, that matter matters. And that we'd find ways to invite the presence and spirit of the divine to walk with us and teach us as we navigate the ups and downs of day-to-day life. You're loved, Crosspointe. See you next week.
Thank you for joining us today, and welcome home. If you are in need of assistance during this crisis, please reach out at crosspoint.org/help.